make of TikTok's move?
Hassan, it's been an iconic fight, I would say, from ByteDance's perspective, isn't it, in comparison to its peer, Tencent, with its app WeChat. Tencent has been really rather quiet over this 45-day period, and we saw that ByteDance has actually filed this injunction order to block essentially the executive order from the most powerful man in the world, and it succeeded. But I would say Chinese government, who is closely watching the development here, would actually feel rather amused, I would say, at the policy pandemonium, rather the ineffectiveness of this executive order that's been placed by the White House. And I think Chinese who are watching this are probably, just seeing how both executive orders as it relates to TikTok and WeChat have basically fallen apart over a span of a week's time for two distinctively different reasons. And so I think it's really something that perhaps the Chinese policy space are really reevaluating as far as its steps when it comes to its moves towards the relationship, particularly the technological relationship with the United States. But I have to say you are absolutely correct. And I think right now, the September 27th ban is out of the place, but November 12th ban is still standing. And so ByteDance still has another major hurdle to break through here. But President Trump has essentially tentatively, in his words, approved this deal between TikTok with, or the parent company ByteDance, rather, with Oracle and the Walmart. But now the ball is really back to the Chinese court. And I would actually think it would be rather difficult to see actually Chinese government would actually approve this deal based on the current terms, as we understand fully now, that ByteDance would actually have absolutely no equity control in this newly formed entity, TikTok Global. And I think I would give it a low probability that China would actually make this a precedence and sort of opening the floodgate for other Chinese companies who might be put into similar positions in the future. If TikTok gets sold to a U.S. company, what about DJI, who 70% of its products is actually sold in the U.S. market? What about BGI, the genome company that are actually, they have quite a sizable investment in the United States? What about Alibaba? So I would think overall, right. A lot of wild cards on the table, but November the 12th, if the U.S. presidential election is out of the way, there are actually more possibilities on the table as well.
In the end, Shirley, this is about techno-nationalism. I'm just wondering, since we're watching the U.S. presidential debate really closely, if Biden were to win this race, would it make any difference at all? Because when it comes to Biden, he says still that China is the biggest security threat for the world.
Well, that's rather interesting, Hashin. If you saw that, China-U.S. relationship is fundamentally the most crucial relationship, I think, not only for both countries, but really for the 21st century. And in 2016, U.S. President Trump actually campaigned on his very strong China message. And so I would imagine that China, even though it didn't appear very strongly in today's debate, but it's going to continue to be the centerpiece of the 2020 U.S. presidential election by both candidates. But rather interestingly, we have heard that Vice President Biden has come out at some point in time challenging President Trump's policy towards China in leveraging these tariff acts against China. But it seems to me that the Biden-Harris team has not come up with its own China policy as of yet. Everything that's been talked about as it relates to China has been the antithesis to what President Trump has done in the past, in the first term. And so I think it's essential, perhaps over the coming days, we're going to see that the Biden-Harris team, they do need to come up with a strong China discourse.
Shirley, we've got a lot to get through, so if you can keep your answers a bit briefer, it would be great. Shirley, so, where does this leave us? Neil Ferguson has called this Cold War 2.0. You're saying that if it is that, that's probably a good scenario. Why?
Well, Rush, you are right. Ferguson has been talking about Cold War 2.0 for quite a while. And if it's a Cold War 2.0, we are basically referring to the Cold War 1.0 essentially from the 20th century. And if we look at it, that was actually not a bad period for the 20th century at all. During that period of time, man landed on the moon, and during the Reagan administration, we essentially ushered in the entire internet era. And so the Cold War period, economically speaking, was actually a very, I think, a healthy period for global economy, but also Cold War was also named as the long peace. And so that was a period of time that the world was relatively at a very peaceful period of time. And so I think right now, with the unsustainable amount of debt that the global central banks has been pumping into the system, and with this lingering economic consequences of COVID-19 that can potentially last for years, we are really, I think the question that we have to worry about is, are we really in the 1950s or are we back to the 1930s? And I would say that if we are actually just somewhere in the 1950s, that's actually a much better scenario than if we were to moving back a little bit more to the 1930s.
Shirley, briefly again, so you know, we're having this digital and technological decoupling. Some have been referring to it as the building of a digital Berlin Wall. China and data and China and technology are married together, and this is fundamental for China's future, is it not?
Oh, absolutely. I think we should focus on one economist, Zhu Min. He was one of the 9 leading economists that was actually invited to present to Chinese President Xi Jinping just a few weeks ago. And so Zhu Min, who was the former deputy managing director of the IMF, he recently wrote a report in Chinese press. He says that by 2030, the Chinese government hope is to have twice as much amount of data as that of the OECD countries combined. And so let's think about that. So China not only has a first mover advantage in telecom infrastructures in 5G technologies currently, but also that marriage with the telecom infrastructure and the amassing of data possibly to become the country that owns the largest amount of data by a large margin by 2030. That in the age of digital economy and what we call data capitalism, data is essentially a fundamental factor of production. And so that economic rationale, once China gets there in becoming this country that amasses that humongous amount of data, I think that economic rationale will become very robust and self-evident.